Hey guys, and welcome back to Queenie Quilt Studio. This is day 58 of 100 Days of Sewing, and today I'm going to talk about scraps. If you've seen very many of my videos or watched my Instagram, you know that scrappy is my favorite color. So today I'm going to walk you through kind of what I do in terms of getting my scrap bins sorted, how I fill them, what goes where. It's one of the things that I get often asked about how I deal with it. So this bin, which is basically 9 by 12, sits under my cutting table. And essentially what happens is anything that's less than 9 inches wide, if it's a full strip, so like this strip is a binding I put on a quilt a while ago, and this strip that's left, the piece that's left, is less than a fat quarter worth of fabric. So it's either less than 9 by 42 or it's less than 18 by 20-ish. Anyway, so anything that's less than a fat quarter goes into this box. So that means you might have some leftover stuff that was going to be binding. You might have a random piece of a part of a strip. You could have the leftover pieces from this quilt. So this is like it's actually 1 3/4 inch strip, probably by 20 inches. Random triangles, little pieces, you know, every little bit of everything. Some bigger pieces, so there's some, there's like 5 or 6 of these, this is the piece of the strip that was left over when I made when I cut out these components here. Pieces from a border, you know, you name it, it's just in here. So I'm going to turn you around so you can see what I'm doing while I talk, so you can see how I actually cut them on the mat. But basically we're going to process this strip or this box of stuff into my scrap user system. So I use a system pretty much based on Bonnie Hunter's suggestion, but I don't do all the sizes that she does. I do some larger sizes and some different sizes, but I don't do as many as she does. So this is like I think this is the leftover fat quarter of a project. Anyway, so first I'm going to go press all these things so that they're nice and flat, and then I'll meet you back here facing the mat. See you in a bit. Okay, we're back at the mat. I have my bin here of stuff. I have pulled a few things out already, and I have my rotary cutter, and I have a pair of rulers. So I like the 4.5 by 12.5 and the 6.5 by 12.5 by Creative Grids. And for these, I'm just going to pull them out and basically take a look at them. So these are part of a Judy Niemeyer quilt I worked on last week. I'm really just going to put them here and see what they look like. Measure them up. I like to use this one sort of to measure. So they're not 4.5. So I'm probably going to turn them into 2.5 inch strips. So the first thing I'm going to need to do that is to square them up. So if I look at them and I kind of look at the grain and where I think the straights are, because that's one of the thing that's complicated is once this small piece has been disassociated from the larger piece it came from, you don't know which way is bias, which way is not. So we're going to have to make some assumptions. It looks like this edge at some point was used as a cutting edge. It's very, very straight. So I'm going to assume it is straight. And then I'm going to see what I can get out of it. So for my scrap user system, I cut 2 inch, 2.5, and 3.5 inch strips. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see if it's 3.5. And it is. So I'm going to line up my 3.5 inch mark on the edge, and I'm just going to cut this edge off. Now this little piece, I am not going to keep. It's not big enough for me to do anything with. I basically, as soon as it's 3/4 of an inch, I'll keep it, but this is a little over a half, I would say. Yeah, it's not not quite a half all the way through. So this will go in the trash. And this will go in a pile up here for 3.5. Now, that 3.5 inch pile, I would then cut down into 3.5 inch squares. I very rarely use 3.5 as a strip size. Occasionally I do, but I happen to know that I have lots and lots of pink and purple 3.5s. 3.5 inch strips. So I'm going to then further cut this down into 3.5 inch squares. Because I know I don't have very many of those because I emptied that purple 3.5 inch square jar. The other reason that I will go ahead and cut it down into 3.5 inch squares is because I don't keep it as a strip unless there's at least 20 inches. Now this scrap here, I've cut two 3.5 inch squares. Those will go in my 3.5 inch square pile. And this strip, this little scrap, I will actually keep. This will go in my big scrap bin. So I have a big bin full of funny shaped scraps. So they're too big to throw away, basically, but too little to really do anything with. So they go into a minis bucket, and I'll use those for doing little paper piece projects in the future. So these will just go, and these go in this way. They don't get sorted by color. They just go into either background fabric, so white, cream, maybe a light brown, maybe a light pink, and then a colored thing. So this will go in the colors group. And then I'm going to do that same thing with this piece. So this one is actually two pieces of the same fabric. I'm going to do the same assessment. So I'm going to look and see how big it is. It is straight on that one side. So I'm again going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut it into 3.5 inch squares. So I'm going to cut that off and put it in the trash. I'm going to turn this around. Square up this edge, which we know is not straight. And cut a few more of those 3.5 inch squares. So make sure you line it up on the right notation. So we're doing 3.5. And again, we have a little piece here, or two little pieces really, that will go in our miscellaneous colors. So I'm going to pull the next piece, which appears to be an unequal strip. So it looks like maybe I was cutting, because this is a binding on a couple of quilts. So I must have been cutting on a binding, and it's just not, it wasn't a full strip. So what I'm going to do there is try to make it into a full strip and keep as much of it as possible. So if I turn it into a 2 inch, so 1 full inch, 2 full inches, I can keep basically that entire strip. So I'll cut that. This will go in the trash. And then I will hold on to this, what is now a 2 inch strip. And this is a full width strip. So it's going to go in a bin of 2 inch strips. So for right now, I just put them in a 2 inch pile on my table, and I keep going. This guy, is it 2 pieces or 1? No. Okay, so this is an even stranger piece. So I'm going to look and see what we got. So this one, it could not be a 3.5 inch because there's a little piece cut out there. We don't keep 3 inch. I do want to keep as much of it as possible, so it might make more sense. Yes, it will make more sense to cut 2 3.5 inch squares. Did I cut them big enough? I did. So 1 3.5 inch square, 1 piece of trash. Another 3.5 inch square. You got to make sure that edge is actually square. This again will go in the trash. That goes in my 3.5 inch square. And then I have this odd bit here. So I want to retain as much of it as possible. So I will cut it right there, throw this in the trash, and throw this in my odd mince bin so it goes here. So next up I've got this guy, which is a series of guys. This is like 5 or 6 layers. Sorry, it's only 4 layers. Okay. At the narrowest part down here, it is not quite 2.5 inches. So it's not a good candidate for 2.5 inch squares. It's not a good candidate for strips. So what I am going to do is, I think I'm going to cut, let's see how wide it is. So it is 4.5 inches wide, but I don't, if I were to cut it 4.5 inches wide, I'm not going to get very many 4.5 inch cuts because I can't get to a 4.5 inch cut until here, which doesn't leave this 4.5. So I can't make a 4.5 inch square out of it. So it actually makes more sense for this one to cut it into 2-inch strips and then subcut those into 2-inch squares. So I'll put this down. That I'll cut these into 2-inch strips. And then I'll use the 2 ruler method to square off these triangles on this end. These, I could go either way with this. I could keep this in my odd mince bin, or I could go ahead and throw it away. I know I've got a lot of this in my odd mince bin, so I'm actually going to put this in the trash. And then I'm going to cut 2-inch squares. So that's the marking for 2-inch squares. And I'll just make a 2-inch squares pile. And then when you get to this point, these I'll keep. They're fairly large. They'll go in my odd mince bin. There's not quite enough to get another 2-inch strip there. Now this one, I could cut another 2-inch strip. That would be no problem, which I think is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to put this in my odd mince bin because it is fairly long and narrow, so it will be a good thing for a scrappy log cabin, like a paper pieced one. So I'm going to put that in my odd mince bin. And again, I'm going to use the 2 ruler method to maximize the number of 2-inch. Again, I'm going to throw that one away because there is quite a bit of that teal color collecting in my odd mince bin. So those are 2 inches. Again, this one's going in the trash. Now, this one is a leftover piece from a project. It's already a triangle. It's not a good candidate. It's kind of a waste of fabric to cut it much smaller than this. So I'm going to put this straight into my odd mince bin because I have quite a bit of this in my 2-inch bin already. So I'm going to put it straight into odd mince and then just use it in a slightly bigger application from the crumbs pile. Okay, next up I have that, I think it's 1 3/4 inch strip. It's not quite 2. Yeah, it's 1 3/4 inch strip. But I've got quite a bit of it. Now I do keep 1.5 inch strips in my scrap user system. So I'm going to do a quick measure and see how big this one is. It does get to 20. So I will keep this as it is at 1.5 and cut off that extra 1/4 inch. So I do that by lining this up, making sure it's nice and straight, and then cutting it at 1.5. Okay, so this will go in the trash. This will go in 1.5 inch strips. Now, what about when you get to this guy? So this guy is essentially, see how big he is. He is 7 inches wide and just over 20 inches. So He is a full half length, so he is a good candidate for strips. So, but 7 inches is an odd measurement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut 2 2.5s. That is the most popular measurement in my scrap user system. It's the one I use the most. That one and 6.5. So I cut 1 2.5. Then I'm going to remeasure and see what's going to happen here. So I really only have 4 1/4, which means I could do either 2 2s or a 2.5 and a 1.5, but I can't really do a 2.5 and a 2. I don't have quite enough fabric. And I do have quite a bit of orange in my 2.5s, so I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 2s. I have this. So there's that 2. And of course, when doing a scrappy quilt, you really don't want too many of the same fabric in your size consideration. So I never, if it's a large piece like this piece here, it's fairly large. This one is, let's see, well, it's about the same as the other one. It's almost not quite 7, but this one is a full 42 inches. So it's a full selvage to selvage strip. And you can see it's not straight on either side. So the first thing we have to do is square it up, get it straight. So I'm going to do that first. And then I'm going to remeasure and see what I have to really work with. Once this one's measured up, it looks like I've got not quite 6.5 inches by 42. So 6.5 is the largest size that I keep in my scrap user system, is 6.5 inch squares. I do keep them 6.5 inches in 6.5 by 42. But 6.5 is the largest size essentially. So this one does not, it's not quite big enough. It's a little short. For 6.5. The next closest size, next largest size that I keep is 5 inches. Now this one is plenty big for 5, but you want to maximize what you have available. So it sort of makes more sense to cut a 2.5, a 2, and a 1.5. Is that going to be too big? So 2.5 plus 2 is 4.5 plus 1.5 is 6. So that's probably the best use. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut a 2.5. I always want to cut my biggest size first. So if I make a mistake, I retain as much as I can. This one's going to be a 2. And then this one's going to be a 1.5. Again, just put those in your little piles, and then I'll go file those little piles in a little bit. This one's a little too small to do anything with, so I'm going to throw it away. And I'm going to go back into my bed and see what I got. So this is some very light purple. It was a background in a project in my wind spinner quilt. So let's see how many layers we've got. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers. They are approximately, they're a little less than 5. So they can't become a charm square. They really can't become, and they're not very long. They're quite short. Just over, let's see, 11 inches, and not all of them are even 11 inches. So this one really qualifies for the largest, you want to cut the largest number of squares that you can out of it. So we're gonna just have a look here. So 4 is the largest, but we don't cut. Well, I don't put a 4-inch in my scrap user system because those would be 7.5-inch finished blocks, and that's a really awkward size. It's just not used very often. So we'll cut these down to 3.5. So I'm just going to use this to square them up. Cut these at 3.5. These are going to all go in the trash. Now, this end is more uniform than this end. So I'm going to start my cuts from this end where they're more uniform, so I can get as many as I can maximize my use of that. So I'm just going to cut this off square. And then I'm going to cut these at 3.5. So those go in the 3.5 pile. Those go in the 3.5 pile. And then we'll look and see what we got here. So we've got, this is 2 inches here. This is 2.5. And I do have just a little thread here hanging out. So I'm going to do these at 2.5-inch squares. So this will go to the trash. These will get cut at 2.5. They'll go in a 2.5-inch pile. And then these, again, these are kind of one of those sizes that I could go either way. I could put it in my scrap bin or in the trash. I'm going to put it in my scrap bin because it is a really nice pale lavender that I can almost use as a background. So I'm going to throw it over there. All right, next up, what do we got in here? Oh, we got a nice big piece. So let's do the smaller one first. So there's 2 of these. They look like they were cut off the fold. And they are almost 3 inches. So I'm going to cut these to 2.5-inch squares. Now I do need to be a little extra careful here because they have that fold, just to make sure that they're nice and flat when I actually trim them up. And then I'm just going to trim them at 2.5. Make as many 2.5-inch squares as I can, and put them in the 2.5-inch square box. Okay, and all we're going to get is this one pair, so they'll go in the 2.5. This will go in the scrap box. All right, oops. This is the rest of that piece. So this one is, yeah, just under 10 inches. So it's kind of this one's kind of the maximum size you'll ever see me in a processing scenario. So this is a background in a quilt. And this is just what, probably I needed to buy 2.25 and I bought 2.5 because the shop didn't do quarter yard cuts. So in this case, I love this fabric and I know it will be a great background. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut it into 2.5-inch strips. I'm going to check it and see how straight that last cut was, and it's not very straight. So I'm going to trim him up. And then I'm going to cut 2.5-inch strips. So obviously from what you've heard me say, I do make decisions based on what I know I have and what I know I don't have. So one of the hardest things to have in 2.5s, or not hard to have because you can easily cut them, but more the things you usually have less of are lights when it comes to 2.5s. Most of your jelly roll, or Bally Pop, whatever, you know, whichever manufacturers of fabric you're using. 2.5s are in the roll are usually the darks. There's fewer lights in a collection. As a result, I tend to not have a lot of 2.5-inch leftovers that are light. So I do on occasion when things happen like this where I can get 3 2.5-inch strips out of this piece, I will cut them all into 2.5 rather than do a 5-inch. Or in this case, I could have even done a 6.5, but I don't need any 6.5-inch. So I do kind of keep an eye on it. I did cut 3 2.5s, and then this one is a 1.5, so it's going to go in my 1.5 pile. Then I'm going to have a look at this. So this is significantly more than a 1/4 yard. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think they're 4.5-inch strips. They are. I was testing a pattern for a friend who is a pattern designer. This is the background, and I followed her instructions, and she had, it's one of the things we do as designers is we test our patterns to make sure that they're correct. In this case, there was just a multiplication error. As a result, though, I have significantly more fabric than I need. So I have a couple of choices. I could put these in a 4.5-inch bin if I wanted to, but I don't have a 4.5-inch bin. I could put these, and I have been known to put these together just like this and then put them back in my, so this is in my backgrounds. Well, originally came from my backgrounds bin. So I could put this back in my backgrounds bin just as they are, cut like, just like they are, and hope that I can remember that I have 4.5s already cut in there. Now there isn't another piece of this, so there isn't enough unless I need 4.5s, and you know, it's about 22 inches. So a little more than half of a yard of background. It's not likely that this would ever get used if I put it in my backgrounds. I could do it, and I have done it before, but it's not likely going to get used because it's not enough fabric for anything other than a baby quilt. And even on a baby quilt, it's probably not enough fabric to be the exclusive background in the quilt. I do know I have a couple of projects coming up that I could use these, that it might be a good candidate. So in this case, this whole stack, instead of cutting it up like I would usually do, I'm going to set aside, and tomorrow I will look at my priorities list and see where those projects are and whether or not these might be good candidates. So I'm just going to take this whole group and set it aside and come back to it. And so I'm going to keep going all the way through here. So I've got some more of those triangles that we talked about earlier. I know they're going to go in that pile. I've got a bunch of these, which are individual cut off triangles of this blue. This is one you had to cut out a funny shape out of. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep sorting, going through this bin. But essentially, I've shown you all the different things I do. I cut them into the sizes. I will put in the description the sizes that I cut things to and the strip. So I keep strips that are either, well, greater than 20 inches up to 42. And I keep squares in specific sizes. So I keep 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3.5, 5, and 6.5. But I'll put all of that stuff down in the description. But yeah, I'm just going to work my way through here. You probably don't want to see me spend the rest of this hour doing this, because this will probably take me probably half an hour, maybe 45 minutes to go through. So for these, so once I'm done processing those, there are a few other things I do. So I want to show you that. So all of those components that I have cut today, I cut these 1.5-inch strips, right? They go in their own bin by themselves. These are my 2.5s that I cut. 2.5-inch strips. They're going to go in a bin. These 2-inchers here go in a box. So they go in what is essentially an old Dansk cookie box. So I have so I have these in my, more of these in my on my shelving unit. And in each one, there is a small box. Mostly they're leftover cookie boxes or candy boxes from Costco. I do have a few that don't have those, that just have like a box from Amazon. And the squares go in the box that sits in here, and the strips of the same size go in the bottom of the box. And they'll get sorted by color. So all of these two will go in the blue. This one will go in the backgrounds. These will go in the 2.5s. This will go in the background group. This will go with the oranges. This one will go with the blues. And that's really all I do, is sort them according to size and then according to color for the strips. But I don't sort the ones in the tin by color. They're just all in the tin. And then if I need to go pull them out, I'll go pull them out. But I just stack them on top of each other in the bin until I need them. So over the next few weeks, you're going to see a lot actually of scrappy projects. I'm working with a friend doing a challenge for December for Ronald McDonald House. And as part of that, you're going to see lots of scrappy projects. So you're probably going to see most of these fabrics again, along with a bunch of other ones that are in my stash already. So that's the plan for the next couple of weeks. I hope you will join us to see those projects upcoming. I hope you enjoy working through your scraps and getting them handled, and enjoy making scrap quilts. If you don't, the quilts that are upcoming don't have to be made scrappy, but I'm going to show you how to make them scrappy, because my view is you can have one fabric or you can have 14 and it'll be better. So that's the scrap world according to Catherine. So I will see you guys next time. Have a great day.